Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, Volume 2, page 46. Virginia Satir's family reconstruction process provided a vivid dramatization of what a client's parents had to deal with from their parents. And how that created their limitations. In this process, the parents' bad treatment of the client is seen as a consequence of the parents' limitations and had little or nothing to do with any limitations in the client. Their previous thoughts about not deserving, etc., were all a result of a mistaken scope. When you realize that your understanding was a mistake, you can easily shrug it off and move on. Of course, some people will blame themselves for making the mistake, but that is also a mistake at a more general logical level. The same kind of process can be used to elicit this realization. See yourself as a tiny infant or young child and scold them for making this mistake in misunderstanding their parents. Another way to work with internal negation is with Connery Andreas' core transformation process, in which someone is guided to a realization of what they really want, which is an experience of being, uncluttered by not deserving or deserving. When not deserving disappears, there is no longer any need for deserving to negate the undeserving. Unpleasant things and pleasant things happen to each of us, and that's a fact. We can be sad about the unpleasant events and grateful for the pleasant ones, and realize that we didn't deserve or not deserve either one. That allows us to return to simply experiencing whatever is going on, including our responses to what is going on, free of any thought or question about deserving it or not. This is something that sages and saints have described for centuries, using various terms like enlightenment, waking up from the world of illusion, or simple acceptance of what is. Many people who actively seek spiritual or mystic experience are driven by an underlying negation without realizing it, seeking bliss and oneness without first neutralizing the inner negation that keeps them from returning to their original integration and oneness. This is even more likely to be true of spiritual teachers and gurus who become invested in the status and importance of their employment and have to uphold their role of being enlightened, a sure sign that they are not deserving. Now let's examine deserving in more detail to find out how people get into this kind of mess in the first place. The meaning of the word deserve is a shortened version of I think I should have get something because I have a right to it. Whenever a word is a condensed and shortened of a longer communication. It is usually packed with hidden or poorly recognized meanings that can become a trap for the unwary, both speakers and listeners. There are both pleasant and unpleasant versions of deserving, as in, she deserves a medal for what she did, or he deserves to be hung for that. So deserving is an expression of reward and punishment established by someone's judgment of what ought to be. Usually the word deserve is used without any additional information. He deserves it. That kind of statement is called a factive, because it is stated as a fact, not to be questioned. Even when deserving is stated as someone's personal view, I think he deserves it. The reason for deserving is often omitted. When people say that they deserve something, usually the implication is that someone else should give it to them without their having to do anything to receive it. Their reason is usually because they are entitled to it, and often this is because they are special, more important than someone else who does not deserve it. A version of the divine right of kings and the nobles that the kings entitled by giving them titles. In NLP terms, deserving is an outcome that is ill-formed, because it is not under the control of the person who has the outcome. Someone else should provide it. Since we have no direct control over what someone else does, this puts the person who deserves at the mercy of someone else's ability and willingness to provide that they want. When someone else does not provide what someone deserves, they usually complain rather than taking useful action themselves. If someone has made an agreement that specifies what they are to receive by that agreement, then they do deserve to receive whatever was promised, no matter how silly or ill-advised the agreement itself might have been. Like the word fairness, deserve only applies to agreements, a limited scope, and what someone deserves is specified clearly by the agreement. However, many people go far beyond this appropriate scope, thinking that they deserve things that have nothing to do with any agreement. They often act as if they had some kind of written agreement with God, or nature, or the universe, specifying what they should receive. For instance, often people say, "A child deserves a loving home," or "I deserve an opportunity to succeed." I certainly prefer a world in which everyone has an opportunity to satisfy their needs and has a loving home and opportunities to succeed, etc. And I do my best to move the world in that direction. But that is based on my desire, not an imaginary agreement. Some people even say that something is a God-given right. But if it were really God-given, then we would all have it, and certainly no one could possibly take it away from us. Once I observed Fritz Perls smoking in a school auditorium, where he had just given a demonstration of Gestalt therapy. A woman approached him and asked, "How come you have the right to smoke when all the signs say no smoking?" Perls responded, "I don't have the right, and I don't not have the right. I just do it. As far as I know, life is a gift, and it comes with no agreement or guarantee except that it ends in death, usually much sooner than we would like. Making sure that all people have opportunities to satisfy their needs is a job for us all. It is not based on any kind of deserving. It is based on what we want to have to happen because we think will work best for all of us. And it is up to us to create and maintain the kind of personal agreements, society, and government that support that. Self-worth. Low self-worth is another term that is packed with obscure meaning. In ordinary usage, we say things like, "That car isn't worth much money," or "That's a valuable idea." Whenever we make a statement about value or worth, there are always three elements. First, the thing or event that is valued, the car or idea. Second, a way of measuring value, which is usually monetary, but could also be a description of something else valuable that could be exchanged for what is valued. Third, who values the thing or event? Who is willing to pay for it or exchange something of value for it? Imagine, in turn, that there is no thing or event to value, or nothing that can be exchanged for it, or no one to value it. And you will find that the idea of worth or value is completely meaningless. All three elements are necessary for worth to have any meaning. Now, let's see if the idea of self-worth has all three elements. Presumably, you have a self which can be valued, so that element is present. Self-worth specifies that the thing valued and the one who values that thing are the same. That doesn't fit the description above, but for the sake of argument, let's say that you can split yourself in two and value yourself. Without yourself, you would not exist, and you would have nothing. So the value of yourself to you is immense, and no amount of money or goods would be enough to buy it. Since the value of yourself, your self-worth, is huge, how could you possibly have low self-worth? If your self did have a monetary value, and if yourself was something that could be transferred to someone else, that could create a value to someone else. However, that would only be relevant to establishing an other worth, not a self-worth. So what on earth do people mean when they use a term like self-worth? If you ask them to describe what they mean, you will find that they are making a self-other comparison, measuring their worth by comparing themselves to someone else, and or thinking about what someone else values, thinking that someone else would find them not worthy. It is not really self-worth at all. It is other worth, and the need for it results from the same kind of critical and derogatory comments from parents and other adults that make people feel undeserving. You will never amount to much. You're stupid. Marshall Rosenberg describes these critical comments as different versions of the category "you are PPP, PPT." Piece poor protoplasm, poorly put together. As with deserving, the remedy is to realize that these parental messages are about a different scope. They are not about you. They are about the speaker's limitations and judgments as described above. Another way to create this kind of separation and realization is to reach the strategy of responding to criticism, is to teach the strategy of responding to criticism that my wife, Connery, and I developed over 20 years ago, in which you keep yourself physically separate from critical comments, whether external or internal, and then go through a simple evaluation process to decide whether or not they make sense to you before taking them in as valid comments on your behavior. Categorical opposites. Although we can create categorical opposites in other ways, negation certainly makes it much easier. It is so easy to negate sane to get insane, or competent to get incompetent. Whenever we do this, the two categories seem to include all events, with no middle ground, dividing our entire world of experience into two opposite digital categories. Dividing the world into chairs and not chairs is certainly simple and sometimes useful. However, the category of not chairs is problematic. You can easily think of a chair, but thinking of a not chair is a lot trickier. Since everything in the world that is not a chair can be a member of the category not chair, what prototype could you possibly use to represent this huge and miscellaneous category? The word respect indicates a positive category of behaviors between people. Examples of respect might include images of being polite, deferential, listening attentively, using a particular tone of voice, etc. Those examples indicate the meaning of respect, so we can use them as criteria that we can apply to events to decide when someone is being respectful. Now, Let's look at disrespect, which literally means not respect. Behaviors that are the opposite of respect, such as scorn, disdain, insults, or criticism, clearly fit the definition. But all the behaviors that are neither respect nor disrespect can also be included, since they, too, are not examples of respect. Reading a book, answering a phone, looking out the window, or smiling can easily be assigned to the category disrespect, because they are not examples of respect. Curiously, even behaviors that would ordinarily be described as respect can be included as examples of disrespect if we decide that someone is being deceitful. She's only doing that because she knows she has to. She's just saying that so he can get a better promotion. Whenever someone uses a category that directs their attention to the experiences that a category indicates, when someone is attentive to behaviors that indicate respect, they will notice behaviors that satisfy their criteria for respect and tend to ignore neutral behaviors that are not examples of either respect or disrespect. But when someone is attentive to disrespect, they can easily find it everywhere, because literally any behavior can be categorized as disrespect. This can result in a huge oversimplification of experience in which there is only disrespect or disapproval or inadequacy or whatever the person thinks of using negation. Using negative criteria for a category can easily lead to very narrow thinking, in which there are no alternatives at all. An extreme example of this is paranoia, in which someone's personal world is filled with what the person does not want. Paranoia can be understood as a runway of negation, in which almost every communication is negated, a cruel trap. Negative categories and negative criteria always indicate a potential danger, and it's always useful to replace negative criteria with positive ones that direct our attention toward experiences that we can represent positively with sensory-based examples. When we think of a category of experience like kindness, it is easy and natural to think of its opposite, which we might call cruelty. We could also call the opposite unkindness, but this introduces negation, which we already discussed. So let's use the word cruelty, or some other word like meanness, for the opposite of kindness. Both kindness and meanness can be represented positively with appropriate sensory-based examples, avoiding negation. If we scan events in the world around us, we find that some of them fit the criteria of kindness, some fit the criteria for cruelty, but the vast majority of activities fits neither set of criteria. Most activities, playing a sport, washing my hands, taking the mail out of the mailbox, are neither kind nor cruel. There are always a huge number of events that don't fit either category. Now we have three categories: kindness, cruelty, and a third category that includes all the events that don't fit into the first two. Now, there is little danger that anything that doesn't belong in either of those two categories will be miscategorized as belonging to one of them. Although it is less obvious, there are also events that meet the criteria for both kindness and cruelty. What is kindness for one person might be cruelty to someone else, as when a decision has to be made about who will get an organ transplant or who will get custody of a child, or something else that cannot be easily shared or divided. A small child might think it cruel when their request for something is denied. However, if it is something that might injure them or damage their health, it can be thought of as kindness in the larger scope of future consequences. Great beauty or wealth can be thought of as a kindness of fate of the gods because of the obvious social advantages. But they can also be thought of as cruelties because of the challenges that inevitably accompany them. When someone wins a lottery, they are deluged by people who are eager to help them invest their money, and even more who would like to cheat them out of it. Rich people often worry that others only value them for their money, and live in a somewhat paranoid world that makes it difficult to have close and trusting relationships. Women who are exceptionally beautiful have the same problem of thinking that men only value that, and are fearful of what time will do to their beauty. When someone decides that they don't fit the criteria for attractive or lovable or intelligent, they are very likely to conclude that they are the opposite: unattractive, unlovable, or stupid, rather than somewhere on a continuum in between these extremes. Even when someone concludes that they are attractive, lovable, or intelligent, they are likely to be afraid that they will fall from grace to its feared opposite. An either-or world limits us by offering only two choices, and even the better of the two is a trap. This is particularly promiscuous with opposites like success and failure. Success is often defined as being the best, or the richest, or the most beautiful of all. Then there can be only one successful person out of many millions, and the rest of us are all failures. The emphasis on success and the fear of failure causes the kind of competitiveness that tries to win by any means, fair or foul, cheering our side and booing the other, cheering our side and booing the other, as if it were a war between two sides, and only one side will survive it. Recently, women gymnastics contenders were shown on TV receiving the news about which of them were selected to go on to compete in Olympics. Those who were not selected cried bitterly in disappointment. They were so focused on the narrow scope of being chosen that they forgot that they were still magnificently skilled athletes who could easily do things that most of us could only attempt in our wildest dreams. Their unhappiness is an example of the tyranny of trying to be the best, and where an ability to shift to a larger scope could be very useful. It is one thing to test your skill against another person or team and find out which one is better. That kind of competition increases the skills on both sides, no matter who wins, and the appreciation of skill does not depend on whose side someone is on. A good test of this is to notice whether you can cheer just as hard when the other team plays well and wins, or only when your own team does. Since we create categories to describe what is valuable, useful, or important to us in some way, both a category and its opposite usually attract most of our attention. It is very easy to ignore all the experiences that fit neither one, and it is easy to forget that others can fit both. If we ignore all these events, it is easy to find ourselves in an impoverished, digital, either-or world of opposites, with no neutral ground. In order to do this, we have to narrow our scope to only one, or very few criteria, such as wealth, beauty, success, winning, etc. The same process occurs in the simple litmus tests in political debates or decisions. As soon as we add more criteria or change criteria, the world becomes much more complicated. Decisions become more difficult, but the results of those decisions also become much more useful and satisfying. Rather than categorize themselves in terms of digital either-or categorical opposites, people could realize that perhaps they are neither attractive nor ugly, or that they might appear attractive to some people and ugly to others, or that they have some features and attitudes that meet the criteria for attractive, while others fall short. Categorical traps. We are most likely to simplify our world into digital opposites when we feel in great danger, because then it is very important to identify potentially harmful events and be able to respond quickly. This is the one context in which it makes sense to simplify in this way. People who feel themselves to be in danger often speak in terms of a black and white, either-or world. Sink or swim, winners and losers, success or failure. Their inner images actually tend to be high contrast black and white, sometimes with a splash or two of bright red or some other vivid color. Since this kind of thinking is associated with danger, when someone slips into this kind of thinking, they often feel unsafe and defensive. This kind of vastly oversimplified categorization is at the root of most conflict, violence, and wars, causing an immense amount of human misery and death. "You are either with us or against us" creates a world in which conflict is unavoidable and prevents a search for alternative ways of solving a problem that could satisfy both sides. Categorical opposites can also be used to limit the choices of others in order to coerce them into agreeing. When someone says, "It's my way or the highway," that eliminates any discussion and forces you to choose between agreeing or facing unpleasant consequences. A variation on this is to threaten the withdrawal of love. "If you loved me, you would do it my way," presupposes a world of love and not love. And love means that you will always do what someone else wants. Like any other pattern of communication, posing an either-or alternative can also be used positively to help someone escape from a categorical trap. When a couple is arguing, it is usually about some categorical belief, usually some variation on the theme that they have to convince the other that their way of understanding something is right and correct. It can be useful to say, "Okay, arguing and fighting is something that you already know how to do, and it makes you unhappy. Would you like to learn how to interact in a more useful way, or would you prefer to continue doing what you already know does not work?"